we decided to have a little bit more of an evergreen topic. And I wanted to talk to you about what are the golden ages of games?
The 1980s.
No.
Rule out that one.
Right. So here, like, I don't think there's like hard lines or sort of dates that you can sort of draw. You can kind of like paint some general time frames or whatever. I don't think any time frame really lasts longer than 5 years. Is when you start entering and exiting some of those things. And it does get a little murky just based off of the years in which the art was created and so forth.
What is an age in the video game industry? I don't know.
Literally, yeah. Like how, but video games have been around for, about 50 years now, give or take. And so I forget if we've passed, I don't know. Doesn't matter. There's not a hard date, right?
The first video game was made in like the 1950s, so technically it's been going on for longer.
We're still in the infancy, arguably, of video games. I think we're well past that. I think when people like to like compare where the video game industry is at to like the movie industry or the music industry and things like that, I think it's a false comparison because clearly the video game industry is evolving at a faster pace than those things evolved because video games are standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of industrializing it and creating profit in it and making it a profitable thing in a capitalistic society. Jesus, I'm getting off the rails.
It's one of the reasons why this recent era of games hasn't really had the big leaps that they used to in the past.
Yep.
There's conversations being had of what exactly the next console is going to be, how far away it's going to be, what are the changes, and it's shaping up to be the same exact thing. So now that that's petering off, we can look back at the time when it was all rising up.
Yeah.
And that's when that's the time period where you get into deciding what the golden age of games is.
Yeah.
Especially because when would this age of this current year be involved in? 2020 to 2025? I don't know.
I don't know. I would say right now we are currently not in a golden age.
Layoffs alone.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But like just in terms of the art that's coming out and the games that are coming out, certainly good.
Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3, God of War Ragnarok.
Not a bad era to be in.
Yeah.
We're really not in a bad era right now, as much as the internet would like to tell you that we are. But we're not. We're in a pretty good era right now. I think we've seen better. Yeah. I think we've recently seen better, right? Mm-hmm. I think we just exited, for example, a golden era of games, probably in that like I'm going to say 2015 to like 2020 was probably a golden era of games. You can kind of stretch that a couple of years either direction if you want. I think definitively 2020 ended a golden era of games. I mean, you got Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima, Final Fantasy VII Remake. There's some other bangers that happened that year. And I think we entered another year another era post-pandemic, or in the pandemic, we entered another era, right? So I would count things like, as you said, Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3 in a part of a different era.
Yeah, of course. So process of elimination, not the current one we're living in.
I don't
that
think so.
one's still up for that's definitely in the debate.
I think we're also exiting whatever era we're in right now, and we're about to enter a new one.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I guess the other big question becomes 2010/2011 to 2015, 2014. No, it'd be like 2010 to 2014 because it's kind of hard. Again, this is the problem of finding out
allow some like stretching in either direction, right? I would say 2 to 3 years stretch in either direction kind of works. That's why I said 15, but then you lose The Last of Us, and you go, well, The Last of Us was kind of a big deal, so you kind of want that, and it definitely kick-started the golden age that I was just talking about. But was it part of that golden age? I would argue no. It was part of it was the end of the one before it, right?
Yep.
And so like and I mean in any era, you're gonna find classic. Revolutionary, incredible titles, right? The Last of Us, GTA 5, BioShock, even though I personally don't like BioShock, or I shouldn't say don't care for BioShock. You're always going to find things like that. But yeah, to your point of the early 2010s was okay.
Early 2010s being 2010, the year 2010?
Yeah, I guess.
Is that the culmination of God of War?
2004 type thing. Or 2014 rather.
Okay.
It was
2014. Oh, you're talking about that area.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah,
okay,
the early teens, early teens.
Yeah, that's definitely not the golden age because there's a lot of just okay games. Yeah,
there's a lot of okay.
The pendulum in terms of like the expansion of creativity in the field didn't really move. You had Last of Us and Skyrim, but other than that,
Skyrim's pretty great. Again, you're gonna find incredible titles in every era. Like that's just how this art works. Right?
Uh-huh.
But I
I should say again,
Go ahead.
is you mentioned 2020 for your period that you're initially arguing for, at least putting forward. You're also getting 2015, The Witcher 3, Bloodborne.
That's where I think that era starts.
Yeah. So like including that, the focus was on the end, but
Witcher 3, Bloodborne, Uncharted 4,
Fire Emblem Three Houses in that period.
Exactly.
Sekiro.
I don't care for it, but Breath of the Wild, Sekiro. And then all the 2020 games, your specific games that I mentioned as well. Resident Evil 2 remake as well. Wow. That run that PlayStation went on with, what Last of Us started and then ended with like sort of The Last of Us Part 2, God of War 2018, Spider-Man 2018, Red Dead Redemption 2. That just kind of goes on and on and on in that direction.
Yeah.
That really was something. Horizon Zero Dawn, not our favorite video game, but certainly a very high quality game, new IP that really, really kind of shifted PlayStation, or helped with the shift PlayStation was making in that era, right? Very, very high quality era in there. Again, that 2010 to 2014 was good, not great. I would argue even the era we're in now was better than that era.
Yeah.
Not by much, though.
Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring and God of War Ragnarok.
I think those are about equivalent to Last of Us, Skyrim, whatever else you want to throw in that, the Mass Effect trilogy.
Yeah.
It's
plus the other good games that came out during that time.
Yeah. I think that's about equivalent. I just kind of prefer where we are now than where we were then. And then when you start getting to that pre-2010, I don't know where you start cutting off lines there. That gets a little murky. Again, I think these 5-year increments are still pretty solid, with some stretchability. 2009 to 2005, working backwards, of course, so 5 to 9, I think is a bad era.
See, I cannot believe. Well, no, it's not a bad era, but it's not like better than the one you were just describing. But it might be because you have the orange box, which that was a pretty big thing at the time.
Great game. Portal 2 is phenomenal.
The emergence of now we're playing online. Now online gaming is being cemented, and that's arguably the biggest part of the games industry, even to this day.
Yeah.
Most people will go back and keep playing.
Halo,
and spend money on
Halo,
those things.
Call of Duty, took
Battlefield even at the time.
Meteoric rise during this era, right?
Also, the emergence of things like Mass Effect, which has done something that no game at that point had ever done. You're making me play what's going to be a trilogy. In the case of the era we're talking about, the first and second game, and everything matters and goes, and that's what you're doing. Who does that? No one did, really.
Right. And you'll never see it again. Arguably with the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, but games take so fucking long now that trilogy is going to last 2 or 3 different eras, depending on how you count it.
Yeah, okay, so the other issue is not, I think the bigger issue, actually, isn't the scope of when an era is and defining the games they're in. It's defining what makes the golden age. Because
I agree.
The one you described, 2015 to 20, I think that's definitively, if we're arguing, what was the best playing games that are going to hold up the best years even down the line, I think that's a really good era because, the 2000 games, you can find even great, amazing games kind of show their age a bit, whereas those ones in the 2015s to 20s, I feel like are always going to be playable, regardless of what you're at. And that goes into the whole idea of games petering out in terms of the things they're capable of.
Yeah.
So
this is kind of my point for 05 to 09 is I don't know how well those games are going to age because they were hyper linear. This is where you start seeing the rise of technical fidelity that I personally think has been the downfall of the artistic expression of this medium. Not the downfall, but a limiter of artistic expression in this medium is the obsession with technological advancements, of the obsession of how real can we make things.
That's kind of the thing. That actually adds to the. I'm sorry to cut you off. Finish your point.
And then on top of that, gameplay took a back seat in this era, and it was very much focused on. You saw how meteoric rise in first-person shooters in this era. It was ridiculous, and if you couldn't shoot a gun properly, it was considered a lesser than product. You brought up Mass Effect. Mass Effect 1 is my personal favorite of the franchise, right? But there was player, I'm not going to say backlash. There was player critique of that first Mass Effect because it didn't play like an action game. Because that's what the audience demanded in that time, right?
Yes.
They demanded a game that played like Call of Duty. They demanded a game that played like Halo, right? And so Mass Effect doesn't hold up in that way. It holds up in ways that all you're talking about with great ambition, narrative consequences. You're going to make choices, agency, all these things, right? Mm-hmm. And I still think system for system basis, Mass Effect is a phenomenal game. But it's just how the game felt to play fell short, right? In the ways that people cared about, because they wanted Modern Warfare. They wanted Halo 3. They wanted a bunch of games like that.
Yes.
And I just don't think and I just think that era of games is also ugly as shit. This is because it's again so focused on hyperrealism, so many browns, so many grays, just not a lot of artistic expression at all during this era. Of course, you can find examples where that's not the case. But generally, like, this is a muddy era to me. Like, this is just an era of like, ugh. Like, I don't like looking at these games. I don't like playing these games. And mechanically, a lot of these games didn't do anything very interesting to where they stand the test of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to make the argument of, because I, for some reason, thought Walking Dead came out in 2009. And I was also thinking about Alan Wake in terms that was a year where they were experimenting with those realistic aspects, which would be more of a negative effect down the line. But at the time, it seemed like a period more of experimenting with what kind of games you can play, rather than not including the online games, because clearly that dominated it. But that's when it came out into fruition. We can build entire games only around online play that's not an MMO, which was the market up until that point.
Sure.
Ultimately, though, I think this era will lose out compared to 2000 to 2005.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So even if we could argue, hey, this game came out and this did good and whatnot, it's going to pale in comparison to the era we talked about previously, what we're about to talk about, and further what we're about to talk about with the 90s.
I just think there is a clear step down in 05 to 09 from the rest of them. You know,
Yes.
like I just think it's trailing behind in all of them in ways that you don't see until the late 70s, early 80s, right? Like, where it's just kind of like, all right, well, these are just like ideas,
Right?
You know, of course, I would say these games are better than those games, but like, you know, I think it's again standing on the shoulders of giants, but not taking advantage. Here's my thing about it. I've been talking a lot on a lot of our shows of what games take advantage of the medium. 2005 to 2009 did not take advantage of the medium. For the most part, generally. Exceptions, of course. Exceptions with everything I'm going to say here, right? That era right before it fully takes advantage of the medium in my sense. I don't think we quite hit golden era, but I do think that 99, 2000, wherever you want to make that cutoff, to that 2004, 2005 era, that weird PS2, Xbox One, or original Xbox rather, era, like that, and Nintendo GameCube, was really, really starting to take advantage of what can we do with gameplay, right? What makes this medium different than every other medium? There was an element of we're chasing movies, we're trying to make things more cinematic. Ratchet and Clank was actively shooting to look like a Disney Pixar movie, you know? But I think mechanically we still had a lot of really great examples of games that were willing to experiment, that were willing to give you just a sandbox of tools and see what the player did with it, right? I mean, look at the 2 Metal Gear Solid games in this era. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, goddamn, Kojima was on a hot streak.
Okami, Half-Life 2. I know Okami's not a small pick, but it's visually amazing and stands up to the test of time.
And we're not afraid to play around with art style, to your point. Yeah,
yes,
Shadow
exactly.
Colossus. We're not afraid to be art here.
And I kind of can argue against what we were just saying with 2006 to 10 or whatever we decided.
Yeah.
It was the year, was the advent of online games to the point where it is now. 2000 to 2005 had World of Warcraft, the game that arguably started the idea for Call of Duty people to say, hey, we can make money off of shifting from these single-player games, which is the standard, to online games.
You've also got Halo 2, 2002.
Yes.
Right?
The entire Halo franchise came out during this period.
Oh, you're right.
Halo 1, 2, that's the entire 1, 2. Yes.
So, yeah.
I love 3.
I love 3. That's my favorite of the franchise. 3 is the best game. We should have never moved past 3.
No, it's never going to... Online games, almost all of them, will never reach the heights that were Halo 3. In terms of quality, in terms of how everybody was obsessed with it. Like, I don't think...
And the content that you had in that game is so... But again, exceptions to every rule. Exactly. Even though it landed in an era that I don't particularly like, it found its foundations in an era that I do like. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So, like, yeah, what Halo... That build of Halo 1, Halo 2 into Halo 3, clear line of quality increasing there. I think there are some 3 detractors in comparison to 2 directly, but I would say 3 is just pound for pound a better game than 2. And you know, what 2's influence over that online multiplayer shooting, sort of finding, you know, the stepping stones of that, the foundational stepping stones of figuring out what works, what doesn't work, how to do it better. Halo 2 is an example of, oh, hey, we kind of figured it out. And again, you brought it up and I was going to as well. World of Warcraft changed the world.
Yeah.
Like and it really like created that. It put video games into that era of like, oh, this is a social thing. And the South Park meme of the fat nerd guy in the chair or whatever, came from World of Warcraft.
Exactly,
And, all these pop culture ideas of what video games are and what a gamer is past the age of 13 is because of World of Warcraft.
Being surrounded by adults who don't really know much about video games, World of Warcraft was their standard for a lot of things.
Yeah.
They even knew about it,
Damn, is this a golden age?
It might be. That's why I'm thinking of it, because I think it's beating out the one as much as we love it, the 2015s to 2020s. There's so many other high-quality games that hold up to this day. You mentioned Metal Gear Solid 3 and 2.
Yeah.
There's Half-Life 2. There's Shadow of the Colossus. Less so, but clearly that's only our opinions, because this gets to the point of we have our game club where we rank games based off what we think is the best one. And there's that conversation we've had, okay, what matters more when we're making this list? The quality of the game in and of itself or the history the game has?
Impact, legacy versus playability today.
Clearly we've kind of gone more on the playability route, but that
we still show respect.
We still do. And this is where I think it deserves that even more. Because it's when we're talking about the golden age and why it's going to have the best case for it with this type of argument.
Oh my God,
with
Resident
the games
Evil
of
4
90s.
is in this era. God, Resident Evil 4
Resident Evil 4 is in this era. Final
Shit,
Fantasy
dude.
10's in this era when they first did voice acting, and that was monumental to a lot of people. I'm looking at games to get a better idea. Twilight Princess, you just missed it. Don't worry, Twilight Princess. The God of War got its start there though, as well. Grand Theft Auto Vice City, Grand Theft Auto 3, I believe as well.
Devil May Cry.
Devil May Cry is
Establishing what a character action game is fucking insane.
There's so many good ones. I mean, but at the same time, Silent Hill 2,
but there's a lot of elements of these games that don't hold up either.
That's true, but I think that is counterbalanced by its importance, which arguably it's more important than the games in the 15-10 range, 15 to 20 range. And that combined with still having playable games here, because a lot of the ones I mentioned before, Half-Life 2, you can pick that up. And I picked that up recently. It plays like a game that would be made today. I would never question it whatsoever.
I don't know about that.
Because it plays around with a unique style, and it's got this nice system of the physics mechanics that just make the game play fun and play well. And
I think it plays about as well as those two Metal Gear games play, which I would argue are still pretty damn good, but definitely aged.
Sure, that's the thing. I think that's where Half-Life is able to retain its age. It's able to be a little bit more playable for most audiences. But it's still like it's almost like you're arguing. Personally, what do you think games were better in 2015 to 2020, or are they better in this time frame? Which is why I kind of start erring on the side of, arguably I would say 2015 to 2020, because those are when some of my favorite games came out. But that combined with how important it was, and you not obviously getting what would come later, I think is where history really starts, pulling its weight in deciding what is the golden era of gaming.
Yeah, I also like just comparing the two eras here.
Metroid Prime.
Oh fuck, dude!
Perfect Dark.
Oh god, this era is bananas.
That's crazy.
I was totally underrating this because to start when I pitched this idea in the conversation, I was thinking the mid to late '90s and the mid to late teens. Is where I was going. And wow, and I was like, oh yeah, and those early 2000s are great too. But wow, those are really really great years. I just think the only counter to it specifically is I don't think the base is ready for. There are examples of it, of course, but I don't think the base is ready for more mature stories, more mature thematic elements and gameplay elements and so forth, in which the audience was primed and ready for by those mid to late teens and into the 20s, right? I've always talked about there is to me a clear pre and post Last of Us world. Where suddenly we can start telling stories where the player does not inhabit the shoes of the good guy. He inhabits the shoes of maybe the bad guy,
Okay, when you say that, like God of War is standing right behind you.
Yeah, but God of War never told the player that you're bad. The God of War wanted you to believe that Kratos was wronged. Kratos was a hero and the hero of the story. You look back on the actions today and you go, how? But that was the perspective back then. It was also so edgy, It's just so much edge and teen angst in the 2000s.
But it doesn't take away from the fact, even if someone was incapable of doing it, or the general audience was, he was a bad guy. I mean, there's that scene I know from 3 where he has that slave in Poseidon's temple he's carrying around, and he uses her to basically kills her to open the gate. That kind of stuff is like, okay, maybe he is a bad person.
In today's modern lens, yes, but back then, I think the perspective was, yeah, we're gonna do that.
But even then, if that's what you're arguing in terms of player perception of it, a lot of people still see Joel as, if not being in the right, being in a position where he's more justifiable than someone like Kratos is. And part of that is because of Last of Us' kind of Naughty Dog's inability to kind of stick to their guns. Because I know in the original game, they were like, oh, this whole thing with Ellie, it's not a surefire cure to the disease. There's been failures in the past. And just for the sake of keeping up, like, no, Joel did a bad thing. They removed it, which is kind of lamer.
I just think the what?
Like, if you remove this facet of, hey, it's not just objectively he's doing the wrong thing, as it would later be made into.
He is objectively doing the wrong thing.
Well, it's objectively in the sense of, this is curing, this would have led to the cure, and you rejected that in favor of your daughter and your replacement daughter. But if you include that other element of it, it's like, well, he's not exactly, he's just trusting that they're going to be able to do something at her cost of her life, and maybe it won't result in anything.
I'm losing your point here.
Which is to say that, like, God of War, it never changed who Kratos was. From beginning to A, even if you didn't understand whether he was actually a villain, he was a villain. I don't think player perception, he was an anti-hero, but he's bad.
But I think the perspective of the art from the creators and how it was received to the public were the same, in that it was like a oh yeah, we're gonna do this we're gonna do this badass thing because we're badass and we don't respect women and this, that, and the third. I think that was always the perspective on both sides of creator and observer of player on that, right? Whereas in Last of Us, it was the creator going, all right, here is a complex character with layers. He does a thing that is morally gray, pretty much objectively wrong. How do you feel about it? And the player response was, well, let's have a conversation about it. Because I get it, bad thing to do, but I also get it. That's his daughter, right? I would probably do the same in that scenario because I'm human. We're able to have a little bit of a deeper conversation because of that. I don't think that was capable in the early 2000s like we're talking about, and I think specifically it wasn't capable because Metal Gear Solid 2 exists, and the fan backlash from when Kojima was trying to have a multi-layered conversations and nobody was picking up what he was putting down, caused him to then create the greatest video game of all time. But
caveat to that is that it really is core that they replaced a character that everyone had gotten to love with one who's not that lovable, and pretending like we're going to play Solid Snake again, and then pulling the rug from under that. So I wouldn't say that's entirely because people were looking at the narrative solely from the narrative perspective. They already had their minds soiled basically within 2 hours of the game starting up.
But you also didn't know that Raiden was the rest of the game. You assumed, assumed, this would last 30 minutes and then you go back to Snake.
True, fair.
And then you're fighting vampires in a fucking weird watery hole, and you're like, when am I going back to? I'm not going back to Snake.
You are not.
No.
I understand your point, though. There is clear in terms of storytelling. How are we going to handle this stuff?
I think both the creators and the audience matured to a level where we were able to have deeper conversations about all of these things that just wasn't there in the early 2000s. It just kind of wasn't. We got there though, but for the most part, it was like a
Shadow of the Colossus kind of working against that idea.
I mean, yeah, of course, yeah, but like
exceptions. I understand.
Exceptions, and also like, who was Shadow of the Colossus impacting? I would say younger people. That sort of, that's a different audience from who Metal Gear was trying to reach. That was a different audience than who God of War was trying to reach. Shadow of the Colossus was like this like weird in-between of like, all right, I'm old enough for not so colorful, whimsical games like a Sly Cooper and Ratchet and Clank and so forth, which are also in this era, which are also great, or Wind Waker, which is also in this era and also great, or whatever Mario was doing at this time. I'm a little older. I can handle something, more than all the stomping on Goombas. I can do more than stomping on Goombas. I can't handle these giant non-human creatures that are not cute to look at. I can handle stabbing them and killing them, but it's sad now. Oh, now I'm sad. Like that's the level of storytelling or emotional depth that we're going is, we're sad now. Like that. Oh, that didn't feel good. Is what we're dealing with there. And I think that player immediately jumps. In the next couple of years, immediately jumps into edgy God of War territory, and then is not able to reflect back on Shadow of the Colossus until later. I would argue. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, because it seems like Shadow of the Colossus is a product of its time in terms of how people talk about it. Because we played it recently, overrated in terms of how a lot of people would today consider it. But like back in the day, it was getting 94s. It was getting 90 scores from the critics. So I think it was more a case of just art being put out into the world in the way they wanted to do it. Because Eco had already come out before that, I believe.
Yeah.
So it was just their style, and they didn't really concern themselves with demographics. Now, I agree that the byproduct of that could have been someone younger playing it and all of a sudden being like, I actually think my brother was kind of like that when I watched him play it. It was, I feel bad about killing these people.
Yeah. Maybe you don't really know why you feel bad, but you know you feel bad.
Yeah.
You know, these things. But also, look at the emotional depth of this, like that we're talking about. You killed, for all intents and purposes, you killed a random animal.
Yeah.
You know, you killed a wild animal for no reason.
No
you know,
personality to it. Just,
that's kind of
that's
the depth that we're working with here. Is I did a bad thing and it made me feel bad. You know. Now you could argue like that's the depth of even The Last of Us or The Last of Us Part 2, but that continues to add more context, more layers of complexity. That again, I would argue and to then counteract that 2005, 2009 era, that's when we start playing around with good and bad, evil and good choices in video games. And very often it was like you are the most demonic, evil person of all time, or you're the patron saint. And there was no middle ground.
Yeah.
Last of Us, not single-handedly, but heavily contributed to that conversation of, well, what is the gray area? What is the middle ground?
Yeah.
Fallout was kind of trying to do that. The Elder Scrolls was kind of trying to do that. Their level of success can be kind of debated, in my opinion, but it's definitely there. I'm not taking away from those games.
You would get a different emotional response from a Naughty Dog game where you nuked a bunch of people, as opposed to a Fallout game where you nuked a bunch of people.
That's a great point. That's a fantastic point.
It's not
or
the same
even
kind
a
of
Naughty
game.
Dog game where you killed one person.
Yeah.
Versus, yes, I am shooting nukes at whatever. And let's be honest, there's always a part in a Bethesda studios game, where you go, I don't care about this story, and you just start shooting people, And there's always the meme in Skyrim of how you tried to kill the kids.
Yep.
Everybody did it. Everybody went on a murder rampage and tried to kill the kids.
And then people made mods where you can kill the kids.
Exactly,
So
right? Like, that's just kind of the culture that those games cultivated.
Yeah. But to the grander point we're making, because clearly we're at the stalemate of, relatively the stalemate, 2015, 2020, 2000, 2005.
I want to get into 96 to 99.
It might just win. 96 to 99.
Yo, we are in a crazy era here because we're experimenting with 3D graphics. We're establishing the foundation of how 3 dimensions work, but we're also still working in that 2D plane and developing the best 2D games you possibly could. You're talking like Castlevania Symphony of the Night. You're talking the prime 2D Mario games, which are very, very important. Early Zelda stuff is happening here. Right? When did the first Zelda happen? First Zelda happened real early, right? Yeah, real early. So I might be wrong here. But you're talking like Super Mario 3, which is still heralded as one of the best video games of all time. Super Mario World, still heralded as one of the best video games of all time.
Foundational as well.
You're talking Final Fantasy VII. You're talking Metal Gear Solid. You're talking Mario 64. These games are the literal building blocks for what the medium is capable of today. Everything before this was like, hey, I can get pixels to move on the screen and we can make a cheap tennis game out of here. I'm making fun of Pong or pulling for Pong in this example, right? Or I can get a character to jump and move here, and you're getting early Mario, right? But there's also examples of a lot of games prior to this where they don't even really work.
So you're cutting it off at 1996.
Not a hard line, but I would argue. What happened in 95?
So
I never hear anything pre-96.
I think the greatest argument right now is that the 96 to 1999 era is the golden age, especially definitively if we're including 1995. Let me read off a couple games that came out, not in the 95 range, 96 to 99.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy VII.
Uh-huh.
GoldenEye 007. Super Mario World. Oh, no, not Super Mario World. I thought it was Super Mario 64, which did Super Mario 64, yeah. Half-Life, the very first Half-Life game. Ocarina of Time.
Banger.
Resident Evil.
Banger.
Resident Evil. Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow.
Bangers.
Crash Bandicoot.
Good.
Metal Gear Solid.
Banger.
Diablo, which, that's shut off a lot of things now.
Do we care about Diablo 1 so much? I always hear about
Less
2.
so. Yeah, 2's more important, but it started it. At least has some standing. System Shock 2, which would go on to develop a lot of games that would be based around that kind of horror type game.
Let's establish atmosphere. Let's establish world building. Yeah, things like that.
But probably even more impactful in terms of game development, then World of Warcraft came out during this time. StarCraft, the RTS game where you had online was the crazy thing. You would go on and you'd play against people from anywhere around the world.
This is really the era where we start establishing genre.
You do, yes.
In this medium, right? This is where you start getting, here's an action game, here's a platformer, here's fuck, I lost it. Here's an RTS like you brought up. Here, like all of these different survival horror. Here's a survival horror game and stuff like that. Like this is where we really start establishing what this medium can kind of do, and we create the foundational building blocks for the greatness that we then get in the next era. Yeah. I almost want to say that the next era is going to fall short to is actually going to take a step back in my mind, because they're so clearly like the inspirational jumping off points of what was established here.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I would argue this is the most important era of gaming. Is it the best? You're dealing with a lot of aged titles here, a lot of games that don't play so well today.
But some of them do.
Some of them do.
Like, for example, some fighting games. This big time came out.
Oh,
Street Fighter Third Strike.
Fighting games are so important.
Tekken 2, Tekken 3 came out during this time. Dude. It's just kind of... It's across multiple platforms and genres. Games are being hammered out, and we know what we're going to do. This, once again, you are right. These even still aren't as playable as the 2000 games we were just talking about, or the ones from 2015 to 2020. But at that point, you can still enjoy a lot of these games, and definitively, it's more important than any of those eras. So that kind of has the best of both worlds to a degree. Less so on the playability side, but still. It's still there. It's still,
and I mean, like, we're really hitting a lot of different like check boxes here. With like, storytelling. Obviously, not the most important part of games at this point.
The only part that's lacking, I think.
But we do have standout keystone titles again. Like me 5 minutes ago would argue, exceptions to rule here. But we have the beginnings of video games saying, well, how good of a story can we tell in a video game?
Exactly.
With Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy VII specifically, you start asking that question of, can video games tell a moving, emotional story? And the answer is clearly yes.
Yeah, of course.
And in some ways, it's even more gripping than what you feel from movies, television, books, music, etc. Like, this medium really starts establishing its own identity. Anything before this era, I think you start getting a little tricky. I think the early 90s still have some titles that you can start looking at and go, of course, early Super Mario.
I can bring up a couple to give us a full thing. Here's some games that came out during that time. Street Fighter 2, which was even more foundational than... That was the most foundational Street Fighter, I believe.
When was this?
This is 1991. So this is 90s.
Yeah, Street Fighter 2, was the dominant fighting game until 2010.
Whenever, yeah, I guess so.
Like,
it's hard to say for myself. Even.
It lasted almost like 20 years just off of the strength of that game alone,
You also got Crash, 1996. Compromising the last.
Crash Bandicoot?
Crash Bandicoot.
What about it?
It came out in 96. So,
yeah.
It involves in that era. I mean, some of these people are...
certainly helped in some, like, 3D platforming ways and so forth, but it kind of, like, Crash is, like... It's not taking advantage of the third dimension as much as some of the other titles.
I say mainly because of who Crash is. Ask most people, they're going to say, that's Crash.
The mascot era starts here. I really super...
The mascot era started before this.
Well, I would...
Because that's when Sonic the Hedgehog came out. That's when Super Mario World came out.
I think you could arguably draw a direct correlation of these characters breaking into pop culture when they become 3D.
Yeah.
Mario and Sonic, a little bit of an exception here. But I would say, like, the idea of who Sonic is to the mainstream, of who Mario is to the mainstream, doesn't happen until 64.
Fair enough. Yeah. But, well, by that same token, he did save the gaming industry back in the 80s.
Oh, 100%.
So,
but what are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's
what
true.
level? Of course, you have to pay respect to these old games that built that did all of these things. You have to talk about Tetris and Pong and Pac-Man and all of these things and their effect. And of course, these are incredible foundational building blocks. Everything other than those, kind of crap.
In terms of what in the 90s to
early 90s, even when you start reaching into those.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing for it.
Even in those, like, at this point, I'm starting to talk like late 70s and the 80s, so forth. Like, other than the ones who you still hear about today, everything else is kind of garbage.
Mm-hmm.
No offense, you have to work through the muck to get to the gold, right? You got to dig through some crap to get to what you really, really need here. And so, like, those eras are very, very important to, like, figure out what not to do. What not to do is more important than you figuring out what to do.
Yes.
You know?
Which is why those have the greatest case for if you're viewing this from the perspective of, well, history should be prioritized. But I think you have to have the balance of the two. And playability, where you can easily make that argument for the 96 to 2000 to 99 titles, you can't really do it with those older games. Obviously, the Mario and Sonic games play fun. They play well. But as you said, you had to get through a lot of muck. And undoubtedly, most games there sucked.
Yeah. Like, you ever gone back and played the original Tetris, or the original Pac-Man? It's like, all right, this is novel. Yeah, there's still some fun here. I'm not playing more than 30 minutes of this shit. I'm moving on. Whereas, like, Tetris Effect today, fuck, I'll play that for like 3 hours straight,
Exactly.
Like, there's just something about that fidelity of movement and of gameplay feel that really got established in that late 90s and even into the early 2000s type thing, right?
Yeah.
And then
I'm just naming off.
I just think the great grand experiment of interactive medium happened in that late 90s and early 2000s, right? And we kind of left that era, and I kind of wish we still stayed in that era. You just can't deny the level of quality and impact and
Of the industry as a whole.
artistic punch that you started to get, I would argue, in those mid to early teens, but really started getting that fucking ball rolling in those late teens, early 20s, right?
Sure, yeah.
Like, I just think the quality of game, the amount of content, the fidelity of the content is just on another level today than it ever was in the past. It's not fair to judge. I'm giving the crown to the late 90s.
I am too. And know what, Tavin? That'll have probably the most what's the word? Appropriate response from fans. I feel like that's the era where most people would also agree.
Yeah. If you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, of course.
If you know what you're talking about.
I will also say Tomb Raider also came out in 96. Established that kind of game.
Action adventure, Indiana Jones type adventure type thing. Let's have some fun. Let's have some camp. Let's do all these crazy things, and it's pretty well balanced by other titles trying to be more mature, trying to evolve the genre, trying to evolve the medium and so forth. There's a lot of really great examples of just experimentation and evolution in this era. To me, if I'm to rank them, it goes late 90s, late teens, right behind it is the early 2000s, and then from there, take your pick.
I would only agree. I'm only agreeing with you because some of my favorite games came out in the 2010s. Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Remake, Fire Emblem Three Houses, Sekiro.
Most of the ones you just named are in my personal favorite era of gaming.
Yeah.
So
It's a good time. Yeah.
it was so good, man. We got to cherish these moments when we have them. Because right now, it's good. Good. I would probably rank this. Give me 2010 to 2015 over this era that we're in right now. Personally, probably. No. God, Baldur's Gate 3 is so
and Elden Ring
good.
and God of War Ragnarok
Yeah.
continue that story that people love. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which even improved
Tears
upon
of the
remake.
Kingdom.
Tears of the Kingdom. Yeah, no. Honestly, I would say it's better than the 2006 to 2010s as well, just in terms of quality. No. Maybe I can't say that.
Didn't I say that 05 to 09 era kind of sucked? That was my take,
Yeah, but there's
right?
some good games, and there's more games.
There's good
this
games in
current
every era.
but more than this current era. Like it's had more time to fill out and do more with the genre.
Name me the game that's better than Baldur's Gate 3.
Oh, I'm not going to say that. Well, because there isn't. But
There isn't.
I'm talking about that's one game though. I'm talking about. I'm that's why I'm easily trying to say.
Name me the game in this era that's better than Elden Ring.
Okay, I'll give it to that.
Name me the game in this era that's better than Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll do it.
There's a couple more titles I could do this with. Like we're just gonna keep going.
But I think we're kind of on the money. The late '90s is the golden age.
Oh,
of
for
gaming.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And then
when
the
you start looking at the games,
inspiration,
it's just like,
the continued inspiration and exploration
Yeah.
in the early 2000s continued that trend. I just think we kind of not lost our way, but we just kind of figured out other things that figured out the multiplayer stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and and if we're having a multiplayer conversation, that era that I think is overall the worst era in the modern age, I think it's the least important era is that 05 to 09.
Yeah.
Except when it comes to multiplayer. When it comes to multiplayer, it's arguably the most important.
So with all that being said, obviously not late 90s is on top.
Yeah.
We've kind of already almost ranked them by now.
Yeah.
So might as well.
Yeah. I think 15 to 20 is second.
The advancements and the continuation of the advancements from the 90s, I think
I'm willing to hear the conversation for the 2000s, but I'll also remind you the great thing about 15 to 20s is we're getting the best of both worlds. Incredible multiplayer titles and incredible single-player titles.
We are, but from that same kind of perspective, similar, I should say, the 2005s and backwards, those were the times when you had fun playing games, but also monumentally important games. Whereas as high quality as the new games can be, and their impact will be felt, it's not during a time where that impact is the same level as it was back in these time periods of the early 2000s and the late 90s. And so it's the melding of those two ideas. I really want to say, personally, 2015 to 2020. But in terms of like an objective standpoint, which is what we're kind of going for, it's like, that just had more growth. It was more important.
I agree with you, but I think also something to say for 15 to 20 is we start putting creator tools in the hands of the players. Now, this kind of also starts happening in earlier eras as well. Halo starts playing around with this. Little Big Planet starts playing around with this.
Minecraft.
Oh, fuck, man, the impact of Minecraft.
When did that come out?
That would be in the 10s to... Oh, no, that'd be in like a late...
It's been around for a while.
Like 09 or some shit, right?
Oh, I think it might be earlier. No, okay. Why does it feel older than that? It feels way older.
Minecraft been around a long time.
Yeah.
You start seeing those creator tools, but I think they're really taking advantage when you start looking at, of course, Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite. I mean, Lord alive, you can make your own video games now if you want to by just downloading a free-to-play game, and messing around in a different title.
Wasn't Fortnite 2014? I believe it was.
No, because PUBG came out 2017, right?
Jesus, sometimes games you get so ahead of me. If that is, that's crazy.
I don't think, Fortnite was not 14. Fortnite was like 16, 17.
You'd think you'd be able to just find out quickly. 2017. Yeah, still, it feels so somewhat more recent than it actually is.
Yeah.
That does.
And I think you can counterbalance any impact Minecraft made by throwing in Fortnite.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Minecraft isn't on that part of era where I would say it's even better than early 2000s or 2015. It's all 2000, 2005.
Yeah.
Because, again, Tavin, Metal Gear is in that era.
Listen,
2
man,
and 3.
Listen, man. I'm putting the early aughts right below this era, personally.
Oh, of course. It's going. These guys are.
I think
right
these two are neck and neck. Right?
They're honestly interchangeable. You know what? I don't have.
We're settling on tie.
Yeah, I think so. Because you can ask anybody, and I feel like even from an objective standpoint, you can argue either one of those.
Well, I would make the argument. Early aughts are just a continuation of what we got in the 90s, and the 90s are what's really important here, right?
Yeah.
And the aughts are just this expedited and exponentially like quality increasing era where we're just like, oh shit, we are really flexing and scaling up here, right? 2010 to 2014 didn't really give us a whole lot, but 15 to 20 took it and ran with it. So I think it's in my brain, the aughts are standing on the shoulders of bigger giants, so it's easier for them to be impressive, right? Whereas the late teens are also standing on the same shoulders of giants, but like they're coming off of an era that is way less impressive. So the advancements that they do make, I think, are more meaningful.
I see. Yeah.
Kind of splitting hairs at this point.
You are. I still think ultimately it could be. Usually we don't do ties like this.
I'm not mad. I'm not mad either way, really. But I would argue the 15. I would argue the late teens. It sounds like you're even leaning late teens as well. But
just because, I'm having to fight my own personal bias here, because that's my. Like you said, if I'm thinking in terms of that, in the same way I more often do on the game club we do, I'd agree with you wholesale.
But listen, the greatest video game of all time happened in the early aughts. So
Well, you say that.
No, definitively. As shown by that game club list, baby.
In an incomplete list. It is an incomplete list. So from there, I think it's pretty obvious. Early 90s to...
We can tie the early aughts in the late teens. From there, I go early teens, and then I go late aughts.
Early teens, and then late...
Yeah, so late aughts, so the
2009.
05, 09 era, 2010 era.
Not the early 90s, which was more foundation. I mean, at that point, it gets back to the same argument. but
That's a
more
good fucking point.
foundational. I mean, Mario games,
That's a good
as they
fucking
are
point.
known.
Yeah. Well, I think we start.
You got Virtua Fighter, you got Street Fighter 2 that actually made Street Fighter,
Yeah,
which
but
pushed the entire genre.
You have such an establishment of what I mean. You have Xbox Live in this era, and
You
the
do.
early PlayStation Network stuff going on here.
And
Like,
that's
you know,
something
the
that's never
rise
going
of
away.
Call of Duty and Halo really did mean something. As much as gaming purists want to ignore the influence of Call of Duty. Like, I mean, you wouldn't have multiplayer gaming in the way that you do in a competitive space like you do now.
You know what? I was kind of erring on the side of like, okay, early 2000s, I'm going to give it the edge because of its historical significance in the realm of video games while still being playable. I think the playable aspect of the 2006 to 10 games kind of elevates itself above the importance of those early 90s games.
I would argue I think those games are less playable than what came before.
What's less playable? The 2006
6 to 9 or 6 to 10, wherever you want to draw that line. Those titles are less playable than 2000 to 2005.
I think that really depends on, because we were talking before about how you had to wade through a lot of bad stuff in the gaming industry in those early 90s, 80s, and whatnot. I see that as being the exact same case for the 2005s, 2006 to 2010s.
In that you have to wade through some garbage.
Yeah, but think about all that came out of it. Halo 3,
yeah,
the multiple Call of Duties that released during this time, which would be Modern Warfare 2,
right.
Black Ops.
That
as well.
puts it above the early 90s.
Yeah,
but what was I arguing?
Yeah, that's what I was arguing.
We're arguing the early 90s here. Oh, okay, yeah. So you're agreeing with me, is what you're saying?
Wait, what are you saying?
I'm saying late aughts goes above early 90s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what I was saying. Too.
Okay, but it goes below early teens.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Early teens goes below that.
Yeah.
I get you had Last of Us and
Last of Us, GTA 5, Skyrim.
That's like 3.
I mean, Minecraft came out in the era that I'm arguing against, but let's be honest, the real influence and impact of Minecraft happened in this era. May as well have come out in the early teens. You don't really start hearing about Minecraft till 2011.
When it reached the most audiences, but people were, it elevated to that point because everybody wanted to play it based off what was happening on the platforms they didn't know. Because everybody knew about Minecraft. I remember because I had a lot of friends, our friends, who were, itching at the bit to play Minecraft. They couldn't play it, and they were just constantly waiting for it. And this was also at school.
I was one of those people.
Yeah, exactly. And our school was like that too.
Yeah.
I remember people at our school were just, finally, Minecraft's playable. It's within my reach. And, what really has that same level of impact? Last of Us and Skyrim.
Wait, so you're still putting Minecraft in that 09?
Yeah, oh yeah, well, yeah, I definitely would. It came out that year.
I mean, yes, it did. But my argument is all of Minecraft's impact and influence happened in the next era.
That's true.
This is where we're getting weird, because it's the game came out and
and that's why it's like I'm focusing on the release date because that's all null and void if it didn't come out in the first place, and it proved itself first before moving on to that.
The story of Minecraft is like true, like from the dirt, like hey, I'm just this guy. I made a playable game. It's not really impressive at all. You can delete blocks and place blocks. That's all I got.
Which I think,
and then I'm gonna just keep building on that, and then they just kept building on that and building on it, and it was a snowball effect. It wasn't like it came out and was successful. It came out, and some people were like, "All right, this is kind of cool," and then they just kept adding to it, and it became what it became later.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the first real true example of that happening. I've lost the minutia of my own point at this point.
It's kind of hard to even, like we said, we kind of had a hard time defining the age.
Yeah.
So hard to rank them, even more so.
Baldur's Gate 3 is so good, isn't it?
It is.
That's what I just keep thinking about. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to leave it at that one. You let us know where we should put the rest of them and just how shit the 70s are, bro. Let's be honest. That shit sucks. Tetris is fun, though. And make sure you let us know how you feel about each individual era of gaming down in the comments below. Make sure you share this with a friend and subscribe. Of course, this is the Two Penny Games cast. You can catch this every Tuesday, 8 a.m. Central Time, youtube.com/@2pennygames, and mainstream podcast services of your choice. We are also on 2pennygamesnews.substack.com, where you can read all of our articles and things that we read on the show there. Make sure you follow us there. Make sure you follow us on social medias. Follow us on TikTok, I guess. That's a dying platform, in my opinion. Maybe, possibly. I don't know. They won't let me re-download the app to see how we're doing on that app. So, it is what it is. Until next time, have a great time. And Connor, say goodbye to the people.
I love you, Ankun.